Welcome to Module 6, Preventing Child Abuse and Neglect of Infants and Toddlers in Early Childhood Settings. This module addresses how child caregivers can recognize, appropriately address, and prevent child abuse and neglect of infants and toddlers in child care. The module is divided to allow completion in 2 separate online sessions. The first session provided an overview of child abuse and neglect and addresses physical and emotional neglect, as well as abusive head trauma and shaken baby syndrome. This second session addresses physical and sexual abuse, explains the caregiver's responsibility as a mandated reporter, and presents ways to prevent child abuse and neglect in early childhood settings. The sessions should be completed in sequential order for an optimal learning experience. You are presently in Session 2, which will be about 1.5 hours in length. If you have already finished Session 1 as recommended, you will be able to download your training certificate after watching this video and completing the related post-test and training evaluation. The content of this module is based on the 3rd edition of Caring for Our Children, which is the definitive source on best practice in health and safety in early care and education settings. Links to the standards used in the development of the content in this training session are available on the Environmental Health module of the Building a Healthy Start website at www.adph.org/healthystart. All of the Caring for Our Children standards are available online at www.nrckids.org. It is important to understand the difference between standards, guidelines, and regulations when discussing best practice in child care. This knowledge will help you better incorporate the information that you receive today into your daily practice. A standard is a statement that defines a goal of practice. It is usually based on scientific evidence. It is stronger than a recommendation or a guideline, but differs from a regulation because compliance is not necessarily required for legal operation. Examples of national standards include Caring for Our Children and the ASTM International Standards for Product Safety, such as their crib safety standards. A guideline is a statement of advice or instruction. A guideline is issued from an organization with acknowledged professional standing and usually comes from a perceived need for such guidance. One example of guidelines is the Choose My Plate campaign from the United States Department of Agriculture, also known as the USDA. A regulation, however, is a standard or guideline that becomes a requirement for legal operation. A regulation comes from an agency with governmental or official authority and is accompanied by enforcement activity. Examples of regulations includes the Alabama Department of Human Resources licensing standards and the Health Department's food safety regulations. Because creating regulations is a lengthy legal process, regulations, although they still must be followed, may become outdated and no longer represent best practice. Please remember that the content of this module is based on the best practice standards published in Caring for Our Children. These standards may or may not have been adopted as regulations in Alabama. Caregivers should be familiar with state and local child care regulations and operate in compliance with such regulations. You may remember from Session 1 that child abuse and neglect occur when a parent, guardian, or caregiver, whether through action or failing to act, causes injury, death, physical or emotional harm, or risk of serious harm to a child. Child maltreatment is a general term that is sometimes used to describe all forms of child abuse and neglect. There is no one commonly accepted definition. Each state has its own definitions of child abuse and neglect, and these definitions are based on standards set by federal law. The Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act, as amended in 2010, defines child abuse and neglect as, at a minimum, any recent act or failure to act on the part of a parent or caretaker which results in death, serious physical or emotional harm, sexual abuse or exploitation, or an act or failure to act which presents an imminent risk of serious harm. There are many forms of child abuse, including neglect, physical abuse, sexual abuse, and emotional abuse. Neglect is identified in over 3/4 of abuse cases. Although any other forms of child maltreatment may be found separately, they may also occur in combination. In Session 1 of this module, we begin our discussion of physical abuse, discussing abusive head trauma and shaken baby syndrome. In this session, we will continue to look at ways to recognize and prevent other forms of physical abuse. Physical abuse is an intentional act against a child that produces physical injury to a child. Physical abuse may include striking, kicking, burning, biting, hair pulling, choking, throwing, shoving, whipping, or any other action that injures a child. Even if the parent did not intend to hurt the child, if an injury results from any action including over-discipline or physical punishment, it is abuse. Physical abuse often leaves noticeable markings. Bruises can be an indicator of physical abuse, especially ones on the face or in various stages of healing indicating repeated incidents. Blows from objects, such as a hairbrush, belt, or cord, may leave bruising as well as clear imprints on the skin. A hard slap by a hand usually leaves thin bruise-like lines between the finger blows. Physical abuse can cause broken bones, and repeated abuse can result in multiple fractures, sometimes in differing stages of healing. Spiral fractures in young children may result from an arm or a leg being violently twisted. A child can receive severe burns from immersion into a tub of scalding water or immersion of a hand into a pot of hot water or oil. Burns from this form of abuse are characterized by a sharp, often straight border. This characteristic differs from burns received from an accidental encounter. An accidental contact with scalding water or oil leaves small burns in nearby areas due to splashing. Deep burns with definite patterns may indicate abuse using cigarettes, irons, curling irons, stovetops, or other hot objects. In abuse cases, the adult's description of the injury occurrence may vary from time to time, and there may be inconsistency in the injury description between different people. For older toddlers, the child may give one description of the injury, while the mother or the father gives a different account of events. A delay in seeking medical or dental care for injury may indicate medical neglect, as discussed in Session 1. Or it may indicate that the parent does not want the injury seen by a medical professional. If the family also has a history of using several doctors or various emergency departments, abuse should be suspected. A child's behavior, especially if it is a recent change in behavior, may indicate an abusive situation. For example, a child with aggressive behavior towards adults or other children may be witnessing violence in the home. If this aggression is in combination with one or more of the above signs, the caregiver may suspect physical abuse of the child. It is important that caregivers consciously observe each child and be aware of unusual behavior or injury. It is recommended that caregivers conduct a daily visual health check when each child arrives. If possible, this health check should be done before the parent or guardian leaves so that a child who appears to be ill or injured can be taken home or to a medical professional if necessary. This routine should be accomplished in a non-threatening manner, such as through greeting games. Adjust your position to be at the child's level so you can interact with the child, even while talking with the parent. Look at the child, touch the child gently, and listen to what the child and parent tell you. Write down any findings from the health check and record the site of any injury in your documentation. Refer to your handout, Daily Health Check, for more suggestions about how to conduct this procedure. Injuries that are covered by clothing or hair may not be immediately seen. Caregivers may observe these signs of physical abuse during diapering and toileting routines. Part 6 addresses signs of child sexual abuse. Infants and toddlers, both boys and girls, are at risk for sexual abuse. Sexual abuse occurs when an adult uses a child for sexual purposes or involves a child in sexual acts. It also includes when a child who is older or more powerful uses another child for sexual gratification or excitement. Sexual abuse may include fondling, oral sex, rape, sodomy, making a child view a sex act, making a child view or show sex organs, and inappropriate sexual talk. It may also include viewing and production of pornographic materials. Sexual physical abuse may cause injury to the genitalia, including abrasions, bruise-like areas, apparent swelling, and redness of the genitalia and on the buttocks or thighs. A child may have bleeding, itching, and pain in the genital area. Pain during urination may be caused from injury or from infection. For older toddlers and 2-year-olds, caregivers may notice difficulty in walking or sitting. If a child who normally appears to sit comfortably is squirming and shifting, it may indicate pain. Another observation may be crying from fear when a diaper is being changed or during toileting activities. Sexual abuse occurs in many ways. Abuse, such as indecent exposure and pornography, generally does not present observable physical signs, but may result in behavioral and emotional signs. Get to know each child in your care and be aware of any changes in their behavior. Trust your instincts. Children cannot help themselves. It is the responsibility of caregivers and other adults to recognize and report suspected child abuse and neglect. In Part 7, we will discuss the role of caregivers in reporting. Many professionals, including child caregivers, are legally required to report suspected child abuse and neglect. Failure to report suspected abuse and neglect is a crime in all states and may lead to legal penalties. States may have specific forms or processes for reporting, and child care programs should have written policy and procedure based on these requirements. When reporting suspected abuse and neglect, caregivers should follow their program's policy and procedure and also keep a record of the time, date, and method of reporting. This action helps document that they followed the law and fulfilled their responsibility as a mandated reporter. This reporting information must be kept confidential. A copy may be given to the director or supervisor. Caregivers know the children in their care and should trust their instincts. The caregiver must only have a reasonable cause to believe or to suspect that a child has been neglected or abused. The caregiver is not required to provide evidence or documentation. If there is a reasonable cause to suspect abuse or neglect, then a report must be submitted to the appropriate authorities or investigating agency. Caregivers should be aware of and have the phone number of the appropriate agency for their area. For example, in Alabama, the report is made to the local county office of the Department of Human Resources. A report may also be made to your local law enforcement agency. Reports should be made immediately and directly through telephone or face-to-face communication. Do not submit reports by postal mail, email, fax, or a text message. Caregivers should be familiar with any specific forms required for reporting in their jurisdiction. The agency who receives notification may request that the oral report be followed up with a written statement or report. Be sure to comply with the agency's instructions. Suspected child abuse and neglect must be reported as soon as you have reasonable cause. If you believe a child is in immediate danger, call 911 for emergency assistance. The caregiver who observes the suspected abuse and neglect must submit the report. If you suspect abuse and neglect, you may ask a supervisor to also observe. However, you, the caregiver who first observed the situation, must make the oral and written report. The supervisor cannot submit the report for you. Reporting is anonymous. Do not inform the parent or other individuals that you will report or have reported suspected abuse. You may inform your supervisor of the report. However, the supervisor has no authority over the report process. Caregivers who report suspected abuse and neglect are protected by law and should be immune from discharge, retaliation, or other disciplinary action unless it is proven that the report was malicious. After reporting, caregivers should not expect to hear back from the investigating agency regarding the report or the outcome. It is your responsibility to continue observing the child for signs of continuing abuse and neglect. If you continue to see signs and have reasonable cause to believe the abuse or neglect continues, then report again to the investigating agency. If you suspect the report is not being investigated fully, you should contact your local law enforcement agency to follow up. The law enforcement official is required to inform the appropriate investigating agency so that protective services to the child may be provided. Remember, if you believe a child is in immediate danger, call 911 for emergency assistance. Every child care program should have written policy and procedures regarding how to report suspected child abuse and neglect. This policy must be based on state and federal requirements for mandated reporters. Caregivers, substitutes, and volunteers who have access to children should receive initial and ongoing training to assist them in recognizing and preventing child abuse and neglect. Training also should include a written summary of the child abuse reporting law and the policy and procedure for reporting. If specific forms are required, these should be readily available in early childhood settings. Parents and guardians should be informed during enrollment of the program's child abuse and neglect reporting requirement and procedures. Post this information in a conspicuous place or provide it in written form to parents. Please refer to the handout, Alabama Reporting of Child Abuse or Neglect, for more information on Alabama's mandatory reporting law. In this final part, we will address ways to prevent child abuse and neglect in the early childhood program. Creating and maintaining a safe environment for infants and toddlers is essential. Caring for Our Children, 3rd edition, provides guidance and recommendations for early childhood programs to ensure children's health, safety, and well-being. Specific recommendations are presented to prevent the risk of child abuse and neglect and to reduce the risk of unfounded accusations. All indoor areas where children are cared for should have high visibility, including diapering and toileting areas. Visibility may be through viewing windows and doors and half doors to nurseries and classrooms. All child care areas should be regularly viewed by at least one other adult in addition to the caregiver when children are present. Outdoor play areas should allow visual supervision of children at all times. There should not be any areas hidden from view. Outdoor areas should have fencing and other secure barriers to prevent unauthorized access. Infants and toddlers should be separated from older children, both indoors and outdoors. Safety and prevention of child abuse begins before a caregiver is hired. Program directors should conduct a complete and thorough background check on all employees, substitutes, and volunteers who have access to children. This includes janitorial and maintenance staff, food service workers, and other support staff. If possible, have at least 2 adults with children. In programs with single caregivers per child group, supervisors and other caregivers should periodically enter or view each child area. All caregivers, substitutes, and volunteers should receive initial and regular training on prevention, recognition, and reporting of child abuse and neglect. This training is required by law. Provide additional training to assure that all staff members are familiar with and follow state requirements for all aspects of quality early care. There is less risk of child abuse when caregivers fully understand child development and have appropriate expectations based on children's age and development. Caregivers should plan meaningful daily activities that children will enjoy. When toddlers display challenging behaviors, caregivers should use appropriate behavior management techniques, including offering acceptable choices, redirection, and logical consequences. Hitting, shaking, spanking, pinching, excessive exercise, and other measures which produce physical pain must never be used. Also avoid emotional abuse and neglect, such as name-calling, belittling, threatening, or using isolation. Unintentional injury may occur in a child care setting. Toddlers may fall or bump into objects while learning to walk and run. A thorough and reliable system of reporting unintentional injury helps protect the program and the caregiver from unfounded accusations. Keep accurate records of any injuries suffered by children while in the child care setting. Include where and how the injury occurred so environmental hazards can be corrected. For example, if a child is injured after tripping over a rug, then remove the rug. This concludes Session 2 of Preventing Child Abuse and Neglect of Infants and Toddlers in Early Childhood Settings. If you have not already completed Session 1 as recommended, please do so in order to finish the entire module. Caregivers should get to know the children in their care and be aware of individual characteristics. This awareness and connection will help caregivers recognize when a child's physical or social behavior is different. Trust your instincts. If you think that something is wrong, then observe the facts, take notes, and make a report. Remember, you do not have to present documentation and evidence. Reports are made for suspected abuse and neglect. Thank you for your participation in this training session. The training module team may follow up with you in 2 months to see how you have used this information. A short post-training survey may be sent to you at the email address you provided during registration.